Word. Awesome. Can everyone hear me and see my screen? Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to today's Figma workshop. And we're going to jump right into it. So if you saw the poster, then you see that Figma is one of many tools that you can use to design really cool looking like posters like this one, which was also designed in Figma. You can design websites, apps, any sort of like visual thing that you want to do, you can do in a design tool like Figma. And Figma is not just the only tool for this. You may have heard of things like Photoshop, like Illustrator, and we have had workshops on those as well. But those are more general sort of like graphic design tools. When talking about things like user experience or user interface design, people tend to reach for more specialized tools. And so the CID previously did a workshop on Adobe XD, which is a big Figma competitor. But more so, Figma seems to be emerging as the industry standard for user interface design. So there's things like Sketch, there's things like Framer, InVision, Adobe XD, and Figma. And Figma seems to be leading the pack. So we thought we'd do a workshop on that. Seems to be pretty in demand. So if you think you're ever want to do any sort of like software design, any sort of like web development, app development, and you want to put together a prototype before you actually write code, then using a tool like Figma can be really useful in helping you get started. So that's just a little bit about what Figma is. I'm currently in the Figma interface right now. Um, what I intend for this workshop to be like is something that's very interactive and people can follow along and sort of replicate some of the stuff that we're doing here. There's not going to be a lot of lecturing. It's mostly just going to be us like trying out different things and seeing what looks good. So first off, try logging into Figma if you haven't done so already. So um, if you just go to figma.com, this is what if you have an account, this is what you're going to see. So you're going to see like a dashboard, and I have a whole bunch of stuff here, things that I was trying out. You might not have anything if you just created your account, but that's totally fine. And you can then click new and you can create different types of files. So design file is what we're typically going to be working in. It's a place for, yeah, like all your designs. And FigJam is something which is new, which if we have time, we'll take a look at the end of this workshop or near the end of the workshop. That's also pretty cool and pretty fun. So you can try to create like a design file there. Before we proceed, I'm just gonna check in with everyone, like thumbs up if you have an account, if you've been able to log on to figma.com and you're able to get to this point in the dashboard where you're able to create new files. And if at any point you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and shout them out, or Antonio and Julian, our design fellow and design aid respectively, are also going to be monitoring the chat. And so they'll also be able to help out if you face any trouble. Great, so you can create like a design file here. So I'm going to do one. And you're just going to get like a blank canvas. So there's nothing that's going to be on this screen. But that's basically like how you create a file. And it can be a little intimidating to just start putting stuff onto a blank screen. So one thing that I want to do now is sort of move away from this and share basically this document that I have with everyone so that we all can investigate and look at it together. And so one of Figma's like top features is it's like multiplayer. Like lots of people like Google Docs can come into one document at one time and start moving things around, start playing with it. So we're going to look at that now. So I'm going to share this with everyone. And I'm going to copy the link and put it in the chat. All right, so have a go at clicking that and you'll see that I'm going to start seeing people come into the Figma. Great. And so now I see all of your cursors here. Now, if this was something that was like editable, you would be able to move stuff around. But you can kind of see like all the multiplayer aspect of this. I could do it so that different people can like edit. So for instance, I'm going to give Julian like edit permissions, and Julian, maybe you can try like, moving something around or like generally creating something, creating a shape, so on and so forth.
Yes,
Sweet.
I can select.
Nice. Great. So Figma is super useful if you want to do like any sort of like collaboration over design. And you can see like up to 500 people can join a document at once. If you have so many cursors floating around on the same sort of screen, it can be a little like sort of disconcerting. So what you can also do is just like turn it off too. Um, I believe there's an option to just go here and make hide the multiplayer cursor. So now none of your cursors are showing, which is great, but it still means that you can follow along with me in the same document. One thing you can do is if you don't want to be in my document where you only have read access, you can also click you can click the little arrow icon here next to Figma Basics Workshop and just duplicate this to your own account. So hit duplicate there and you'll have a copy that you can like edit as your heart desires. So that was just a little bit of introduction to how to like create your own Figma files, duplicate them if other people have shared them with you, and also collaborate with other people in the same space. So now that we have that like common footing, let's just jump right into it and start seeing what we can do with Figma. Any questions before we move on? Cool. So I'm going to sort of decompose this poster a little bit. You're going to see on the left side that there are like a number of pages. So that's the way you organize a Figma document. So you can create separate pages to basically like separate out your work. So in this page, I only have this poster. In the work area, you can have other things. And within a page, you can have these things called frames. And within frames, you can have all the things that make up the frame. So there are 3 units of organization. The highest level is the page. The second level is the frame. And then the third level is the stuff that goes inside the frame. So pages, then frames, and then stuff that goes inside the frames. So in this case, we have the first page, Figma basic slides. I have one frame, the letter poster. We can make new frames too. So we just need to click this tool, the frame tool, and it kind of looks like there's these like 4 lines in a square. And when you click that tool, you can either start making a frame of an arbitrary size. So this one is 1300 by 710 pixels. Or you can make frames of a known size. So I'm going to delete that by hitting delete, click the frame tool again. And on the right, you'll see all the different frames that are possible. So you can design for phones, like the latest iPhone. You can design for desktop. So you can, for a MacBook, for instance, and there are a whole bunch of things that you can do. You can design for social media. And so just pick any frame you like. So I'm going to choose the iPhone, well, the first one, the 11 Pro Max frame, and I'm going to just line it up here. And so you see that the frame appears in the left, like with all the other frames for this particular page. And you can double click that and rename it to whatever you want, like maybe home screen or about screen or like just full app, whatever you want to call it. So once you have a frame, you can do like many things with it. Like in other design software, you may have heard of these being called artboards, like Illustrator, Photoshop, Adobe XD, they call them artboards. Figma just happens to call them frames. With a frame selected, you can edit like many of its properties. So here you can sort of edit out the fill. You can make it any arbitrary color. You can, in the color tool, there are lots of different options. So instead of solid, you could have a linear gradient. Instead of a linear gradient, you could have a radial gradient, angular. You can add in your own image. And so there are a lot of possibilities here that you have. So lots of things that you can do. So I'm just going to set that back to a solid color. And you'll see that even within the color, they're like, if you've ever done any sort of graphic design before, there's like hex codes that like specify like an exact value for a color. There are like RGB colors like red, green, and blue. There's HSL, hue, saturation, lightness. So feel free to play around with these and get sort of a knack for what all these color systems are doing. So I'm just going to set this to be like a black background for now, and or maybe just white. Let's just keep it simple. And now we can start exploring some other tools. So we've done frames, and now let's put stuff inside the frame. So this third tool here is the shape tool. And by default, it does rectangles, but you can do other shapes as well, like lines, arrows, and all of basically anything else you want. So maybe I'll do a rectangle for now. And I'll zoom in, just pinching my fingers or using the scroll wheel on your mouse. And you can start drawing rectangles of an arbitrary size. Now, if you want to draw squares, just hold down Shift while you're drawing and it'll scale proportionally. Same goes for other things like circles. So I'm going to choose the ellipse tool here. And normally it's like an ellipse, but if I hold down Shift, I get nice circles. Is everyone following along so far? Thumbs up. Great. Yeah, at any point, feel free to stop me if something's not working out or you would like me to repeat something. So let's just mock up something like really simple for now, and we'll do something more advanced in a bit. So maybe I want to make something like a sign up screen. So always start with like the lowest fidelity thing that you could possibly want. So like basically as if you were drawing it out on a piece of pen and paper with like a piece of paper. And then we can figure out how to make it look prettier. And through the course of this workshop and the time we have left, I'm going to share some sort of things that you pick up after doing design for a while. Like there are easy tricks, and there are a whole bunch more that you can use to make your designs look good. So I have this circle and I have this rectangle. They're like interesting things that you can do to like align them to different parts of the page. So with the circle selected, I can use any one of these to like align left, align center, align right, align top. So there are a whole bunch of things that you can try. But for now, I'll just drag it around. Another thing you can do is if you hold down the Option key on your Mac or the Alt key on Windows. So have that held down, and with your circle selected, try putting your cursor in different places, and you'll kind of see like the relationship of the circle to other parts of the screen. So for instance, if I have the circle selected, I hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Mac, and then move my cursor around. So select circle, Option key, move it around. You'll notice that the circle has this sort of relation, 122 pixels from the right, 121 from the left, 146 from the top, and so on. And if I hover over the rectangle here, it's 112 pixels from the circle. So this can be useful when you're trying to like really align your, like make sure everything's like aligned very precisely. So I'm going to nudge this down a bit here. I'm going to duplicate it by hitting Command D or by doing Command C, Command V. So I duplicated that. All the while, notice that on the left, you've got all these frames and stuff going inside the frame. So everything that we put in this frame went inside of it. Cool. So now we can explore other things that we can do with the shapes. We can change the fill of each shape. We can take any one of these and make it look less harsh. So you'll notice that when you zoom in enough, you'll get another control, which is the border radius control. So you can click and drag, and you'll get a nice border radius for this box. Similarly, you can go here. You can get a nice border radius for this box here too. Now, I may have dragged each of them a little differently. So if you click the rectangle, you'll see here is also another way to change the border radius or the corner radius. So here it says 16. For this rectangle, it says 20. So I'll just make this one 16 as well, so they're the same. And there are other properties that you can play with here, like you could change the X position just by clicking and dragging. You can change the Y position. You can change the width, the height, the rotation. And so there's lots of things that you can try. And if you ever want to get back, just hit Command Z or Control Z to undo. Thumbs up so far if you've been able to follow along. Great. So we're proceeding like
I have
pretty,
I have a
yeah.
question, if
Uh-huh.
possible. I just initially what you mentioned. I have tried stuff out with the frames, but I don't know what the pages are in relation to the files. Like, I know what a file is, I know what a frame is, but I don't understand what the pages do. What is the purpose of that
Yeah, of course.
hierarchy?
So
Yeah.
sure. If you go to figma.com, you'll see your files. So I think you know that already.
Yeah.
All this stuff. Then the frames is
Yeah.
everything you see, like letter, poster, cool app. So a page
Yeah.
is just a way to separate out your frames. So
Ah,
for instance,
okay.
if this was just a place where I had slides, and I don't really have a slide, I just have a poster. And then this could be a separate area where I could create more frames. And so it's just a way to like further separate things out.
Okay. It's like
So
chapters in a book or something.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great
Okay.
analogy.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
No problem. So notice here that if I color this to be like maybe this color, this blue, and then I go back to Figma basics, that frame disappears. Like you can only ever find it here. It's a nice way to like organize your work. Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually had a quick question. It's in the chat, but it's more of an organization question. Like normally when you're working on new frames, do you usually add a background rectangle as a background, if you understand, like a white rectangle in the back?
Yeah.
Or do you just work directly on the frame? Because I always get kind of like confused, especially when I'm making like a new frame or new component to add to a different frame. And it's like, what's the actual background? Is it the frame or yeah? But what do you usually do to keep it straight?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You can do both. I've seen people do both. So you can either set this to be white, um, the frame, instead of like setting a color on it, or like you said earlier, just like creating a rectangle here in the back, setting it to also be white or whatever color you want, and then just bringing it back here, um, renaming it something like background, and then locking it so people can't accidentally move it around. So that's also a totally valid approach. I feel like if you want to reduce the cognitive overhead of having to deal with two different things, frames and shapes, you can just do it this way, and it works pretty well.
Okay, awesome.
In
Thanks.
fact, yeah, no problem. I tend to use this like more often as well.
Okay.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Any questions? Great. So we're gonna wrap this up and then move on to the next thing. So maybe I have this circle here. You can add text too. So we've done shapes. We're gonna skip the pen tool for now, but that's just if you've ever seen the pen tool in other places, it kind of just lets you make arbitrary paths like this. But we're gonna skip that for now. So I'm just gonna click my move tool and just delete all of these. Um, there we go. And then let's go to the text tool. So maybe email. And here I want to sort of go over some of the text stuff. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do with Figma and text. Just going to resize my window a bit so I can see everyone. Perfect. So you can change the font. They have a whole bunch of fonts available. They connect to Google Fonts. So in this case, I'll use SF Pro Display. You can use like Inter. That's a pretty famous one. You can change the size. So maybe something like 48. The font weight, width. If you've got basically a whole bunch of stuff in a paragraph, you can change the line height too. And the alignment and so on and so forth. So that's great. And then there are a whole bunch of effects that you can add to this stuff as well. So you can add stuff like shadows. So maybe for text, it's not that useful, but for like shapes, if we go here, go to effects, add a drop shadow, you can already see it kind of looks more modern already. Things that you would typically see in like professional apps. So we can just add a quick piece of text here, email, and then maybe another one for password. And when you resize stuff like this stuff, you'll see that it doesn't resize the text. It only changes the bounding box for the text. So if you actually want to resize things that don't typically resize as you expect, you'll see in the move tool, if you click it, you'll see a scale tool. So on the top, if you click move, the arrow next to it, you'll also see an option to scale. And this sort of works more typically. So I'll resize them both. Right, so with design, there's like design is subjective. There are some objective metrics for what good design is. Accessibility things are concerned, like is your color contrast and things like that good? Or is the interface big enough? So there is both a subjective and an objective way to assess what good design might be like. So in this case, can anyone, before we move on to some like more fun stuff, can anyone name a reason why this is good design and maybe give a reason why this is bad design?
I think it's a bad design because the background is as dark as the words.
Yeah, very good. So how do you propose we fix?
Change the color of the letter.
Maybe we can change the fill and we can use hex color schemes and make it white or something like that. Another sort of cool thing that might be useful to you is if you sort of work in a different color mode, it can help you achieve like complementary colors, which kind of seem like, which are still kind of close together. So you'll see what I mean in a second. If I go to the background and unlock that and check the fill, instead of hex, let's just go to HSL for a second. So the hue is 0, the saturation is 19, and the lightness is 21. So if this is an easier way to think about colors than having this like random code that is very indecipherable. So if we copy that 0, 19, 21 and go to our text, and for the fill of our text, let's also do 0, 19, 21. So if you now play around with the like hue, saturation, and lightness values, you can sort of achieve like complementary stuff. So you can see that this is like a dark text. Like if you ever want to de-emphasize text, you could play with the lightness value. Or if you ever wanted to have like a different color, you could play with the saturation value. So like lots of cool things that you can do just by choosing a different color mode. So in this case, if I set it back such that it's 0, 19, and then maybe we can go for like 8 or something, or like 50. And so as I increase the lightness, it's still like kind of brown, but has more contrast to the background. So just a random note about like color systems and how powerful they can be. Cool. Great. So any questions so far? Otherwise, we're going to move on to looking at some other stuff in Figma. Vanessa had some great feedback. If you were asynchronous and you weren't on a Zoom call and you wanted to leave comments, you could just click the comment tool, leave a comment here. Like, the contrast is poor, please fix. And you could post that so that I could come back here and look at your feedback. Thumbs up for moving on. Great. So one of the best ways to learn design is by copying other people's designs, not so that you can pass it off as your own work, but more so that you can see like how people created something, decompose it, and sort of learn the tricks that they used. So for instance, if you duplicated this just by clicking the arrow there and hitting duplicate, you'll be able to decompose all the parts of this poster and kind of see how it's put together. So in this case, it's pretty simple for the poster, and it sort of demystifies things a bit. See, I'll move this around. It's just like a CEID logo, this text, a box, more text, and you can kind of see like what different text properties I use. So if you hit the text tool with that text selected, you'll see that it's this particular font, heavy. It has no other like really fancy tricks there. And this is literally just a logo of the internet, a Figma's logo, more text, and so on. So not really that complicated. It's more so when you have these different components, you put them together, that your something more interesting emerges. So I'm gonna look at the chat super quick. Oh, Antonio mentioned a very useful website that you can use to generate color palettes called Coolers. So you can take any of those color palettes and simply just like go into your color editor, paste those in. So that's super useful too. Thanks, Antonio. So in order to learn about like how we can best like copy in other people's designs in order to get better, Figma actually has a very flourishing community. If you go to just your main Figma area, like here, and you click your, or if you just hit community here, you'll see lots and lots of stuff that people have made. So Fig Jam stuff is more recent, which we'll cover at the end, but more so other things like icons. There are lots of like things that you can just basically plug in straight into your design without having to like recreate all of these icons yourself, like this smiley face and this light bulb. You might have to, or basically anything you wanted. You don't have to make it yourself. There's some type experiments, font pairings, mobile design, like ready-made kits that people have built with like mobile components like toggles, switches, drop downs, menus, also like pre-made apps. So like a foodie app UI here, just like sample apps for you to explore. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can do. And I think Figma's like ecosystem is much better than other like Adobe XD, Sketch, so which is another huge draw. And whatever you make, you can also post it here and get creds. Besides this, there are also like other places that you can get nice resources from. So figmaresources.com is like an officially endorsed, like they're endorsed by Figma, and they have a whole bunch of pre-made stuff. So one of the things I was hoping we could do is take this one, Figma food delivery app, clone it, and kind of see like how it's built. So I'm going to put this in the chat. And once you open up that web page, you can scroll down to where it says copy to Figma. I'm going to do that now. It'll just make a copy for me in my personal Figma account. And so you kind of see the same sort of, they have screens. So all the screens of their app. And they have like this purple stuff on their screens. Don't worry about that right now. It just means that they're using Figma components, which is like a special feature. But it's not much different from us just sort of working normally. And so they have this screen page with a whole bunch of frames. So one frame each for their like introductory like area, the splash screen, categories, vegetables, item, etc. These are all frames. And then components is another page that they have with all the individual components that they're using across all their screens. So sometimes you don't want to like keep copy pasting stuff from one screen to another. So you can create something called a component for that. But we won't go too much into that today. We'll just copy paste. Great, so I'm going to go back to this screen. And so maybe this one of the simplest things we can do and sort of already like start practicing our skills from the previous sort of demo is maybe we can just try recreating this screen, this frame, the splash screen. I'm using the words frame and screen interchangeably. Frame is the official Figma word, and people typically use one frame for a screen too. So let's try to recreate this, see how far we can go. So if we look at their layers, we can kind of cheat and look into what they're doing. So if you open up their splash screen frame, you'll see that they've got like really nice like organization. They've grouped a bunch of their stuff. We'll figure out how to do that as well. And so it's mostly a backdrop, a logo, and a whole bunch of like, and maybe like a background. All this stuff. We'll keep it simple. So for now, we're going to use one frame, maybe iPhone 8. It's too small. Let's just use the one that we're used to, 11 Pro Max. And like the question that we received earlier, whether you should just set the background right now on the frame, and you'll see that they have some suggested like colors for you as well. Or should you make like a rectangle and do it that way? So maybe let's make a rectangle for now. They're pretty interchangeable. And so I'll just make a rectangle covering most of the screen. And I'll go into the fill. And you can kind of see that Figma notes like what are the main colors in the document and makes them available for you. So we don't even have to do the hard work of picking a color. But say that we wanted to pick a color that was already in the document, you can just use this color picker here and just hover over anything that you want to copy the color of and just click. And so it selects that color for you. Right? So here, I take this, choose this, select the color. And so it's colored in. Oops. And just move it back. Thumbs up if people have been able to follow along so far. Great. So now let's try to recreate other parts of this. Let's just make a rectangle. We already know how to give it a curved border. We'll give it a fill. We'll make it around this color, not the same as the non-contact deliveries. We'll pull the border. Now, we have a border on all four sides. We don't want that. So what we can do is override the settings so that the border only affects the top left and the top right corners. So the way we can do that is just by clicking this button right here, which says independent corners, and then just make the last two 0. So the bottom left and the bottom right no longer have curved edges. Now we can go on to adding an ellipse, and we can make it a circle just by holding down Shift. We can make it the same approximate size, fill, click that, make it white. So now we have to add in the icon. One thing we could do is go to Google and find icons. But the other thing we can do is sort of, again, like referencing Figma's community of like plugins and extensions and like ready-made files. We could also just find a plugin to do this for us. So Figma has tons and tons of plugins that will make your designs really awesome. Just hit the F logo on the top left, go to plugins, and then go to browse plugins and community. So I'm going to hit that. And there are a whole bunch of things that you can, if you scroll down, you'll see all the plugins that are out there. And you can sort by the number of installs. So if I sort by installs, Unsplash is a really popular plugin to get like free, like high quality photos and stock images, completely free for use. And then Iconify is another big one that helps you like get any icon. And there are a whole bunch of other things like 3D design and blobs and so on and so forth that you can try out in your own time. So next to Iconify, you'll see an install button. I already have it installed. Just click install and it'll install it for you. Thumbs up if you were able to click install. Sweet. So with that, if you go back to your Figma, and you may need to refresh the page if it doesn't show up, but I think it will, just hit go to plugins and then find the thing that you just installed, Iconify. So then it'll open up this panel in which you can basically get any sort of icon that you want. So like happy face or like delivery, package. And so we're just trying to find an icon similar to this one, this box. And so I'll just use that. And once you've selected your icon, just scroll down and click import. And then close out of this panel. So it shows up right here for me. For you, it may show up elsewhere. If you have trouble finding it, just zoom out a bit and then select the layer in your layers panel and you'll find it. So I'm going to take that icon and I'm going to put it back here. I'm going to scale it. I'll hold down Shift so it scales proportionally. And this icon is just a collection of shapes. It's an SVG file. And what we can do is just modify its fill directly from within Figma. So I'll use the color picker and I'll make it this purple color. Whoops. This purple color. There we go. And we can continue here. We can use the text tool, non-contact deliveries, make it approximately the same size. Their text is roughly 41. We can do the same. And we can make it bold too. So you can see that some of their text stuff is a bit different. That's because they're using a different font. We can use the same font as they are, SF Pro Display. Make it a bit smaller with the scale tool. And so it's already looking pretty close. So in this way, we've been able to demystify whatever these guys are doing. There's some other interesting things you can try with text, like if you hit the 3 dots here, you'll find a whole bunch of other cool things that you can try. So you can make it uppercase, lowercase, title, so on. So this really saves you time if you don't want to do it all yourself.
I don't seem to have SF Pro display pre-installed.
So you can install that from Apple's website if for some reason like you don't have it if you're on a Mac, or if you're not on a Mac, then you won't have it. Like, so if you're on Windows,
I'm on a Mac, yeah. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So in that case, you can install it from Apple's website.
Okay.
One pretty close substitute is Inter, and that's available by default.
Yeah. Also, we got a question, Sam, about how we got that box logo.
Oh yeah, so the box logo comes from using a plugin. So we could get it from Google Images, but it would be like pretty cumbersome. So what we did was we went to Figma community, and you can access that by just going into Figma and then clicking plugins and then browse plugins in community. So that'll open up the page. Once you do that, you can scroll down. You'll see all the like top plugins. So the plugin that we're using is Iconify, and you'll see an install button next to it. Once you have the plugin installed, you can go back to this menu, select Iconify from here, and you'll see a whole bunch of icons that you can search or use. So I just chose this second one, and then I scrolled down and I clicked import icon, this button here. When I imported it, it said it was imported to screens. So I closed this and it just showed up here for me. And then I scaled it, modified it however I wanted. So it saved me a lot of time. Just had to do 2 clicks. Yeah. So once you have your text, one of the tricks that people tend to use is like play around a lot with spacing. You may have noticed that for like text, which is like title text or like large text, they tend to work with spacing so that they reduce the letter spacing between each, basically between each letter. And so there are ways to do that here as well that you can play around with too. Oops. Yeah, you can try playing around with the different settings for this. But we'll move on. They have this button here. We also know how to add our own buttons, and we'll just finish this up super quick. So on and so forth. And then you can keep going. In the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to some other stuff. But before we move on, any questions?
Yeah, a quick question on sort of like the background piece. Is that just pure design, or is that a way to get that shape?
This stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are just shapes. So you can make
Okay.
yeah, there are 2 ways that you can make blobs like those. One is that you can use the pen tool and create arbitrary shapes for yourself. So I'm gonna make something like this, move here, maybe go this way, and maybe connect it back in. Right, this looks like a really bad blob, but I think you get the idea. And so once you have this arbitrary shape, you can give it a fill. Maybe I'm just going to select this one for now and remove the stroke. So has no stroke anymore. And you have this blob, but now it's kind of like in an awkward position. And one thing you can do is take this and drag it into your frame, right? So now it's clipped by the frame, but now it's kind of in between stuff. So you're gonna have to figure out where it goes. So does it go before the ellipse? Does it go towards the back? And so the best bet is it goes somewhere towards the back, right? So, whoops, I dragged the wrong vector by accident, and just pick that back. The vector I dragged by accident was the logo. So this is where like renaming stuff can be really useful. So I'm just going to make sure that this is blob, so I know that I don't get confused. And then I can move this to different points. So I'm going to move this back here. And there we have one blob. Now let's make another one. Drag this back, give it a different color. Bring it here maybe. And so you can kind of see like how you can start making them by yourself too.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. And then I kind of noticed earlier that if you go to the community plugins area, I did see a plugin for blobs as well. So we can try that. I'm gonna install that. Go back here, plugins, blobs. So it says complexity, contrast, I have no idea what that means, and then make blobs. So we're gonna make some blobs. And it just made some for us here. So yeah, there's a plugin for just about everything. Great. So maybe let's do the same exercise as we were doing here before we move on to the last thing, which is, can anyone name one good thing about this design and one bad thing? Not necessarily our incomplete version, but just the original on its own merit.
I have no idea if that D in the top left corner is like a button. Is it a menu option? I don't know.
Yeah, good question. Me neither.
There's no hamburger.
Maybe the text is a bit small, like the when placing an order text is a bit small or light, could have more contrast, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. One sort of interesting use of like color here is this call to action, which is green. And sometimes when you have a different color, it's sort of, I feel like the color green and the color red have been completely sort of, they always serve similar roles in most modern UI, which is red means danger, green means good and catch and like awesome. And so I feel like they're playing into that trope here with the order now button. The other sort of trick that you notice, which is pretty common, is like small text is usually caps, all caps. And maybe you'll notice more of this like as you play around with designs over time. You notice a lot of people do this where they have like small text, which is all caps, and they increase the letter spacing between it to make it more legible. That's like a pretty common trick too.
Something else could be a drop shadow on the call to action button could make it pop out a little more and really like draw your eye to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we can try this. That in effect. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I want to click that button.
Another interesting trick is like sometimes people can add I don't know if it's possible to do this, but yeah, so you can add multiple drop shadows. One can be more diffuse and one can be more sort of, it kind of simulates like multiple point lighting system. So one is a close light. If you imagine like your button is on a piece of paper and you're looking at it from the side. So a button is just like in 3D. If you consider your like web page or like your app a flat surface like a table like this, and then you have a button on top of it, and then you have to figure out lighting, right? So every web page has a light source. Usually it's coming from straight ahead. It's kind of weird to talk about web pages and UI like in the context of like photography and film, but I feel like it's still pretty relevant. If you have like a button there and you can shine a light straight on top of it, and then you can also shine a light from far away. And so you can have both diffuse shadows and you can have like harsher shadows too. So that's another trick that I've seen people use. You can add multiple drop shadows. I think there's a way to make the drop shadow here, one of them more diffuse. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. We can edit the drop shadow from here. And so you can make the X sort of be far away, like 10-ish, 10-ish, increase the blur, maybe like 20 or something. And so you can kind of see like the shadow takes on a different quality. So you have both this far away shadow and close shadow. Cool. So now that we're coming up on time, I just wanted to show you like a couple of cool things. So designing is not the only thing that you can do in Figma. You can also put screens together. So in this case, we have a splash screen, but we may want to connect it to another screen. So we can use the prototype section of Figma to do this for us. So instead of using their pre-made screens, let's just work with what we already have. So I'll take this frame and copy it. And maybe I'll call this one like the home page. Let's just delete all the other stuff for now. I'm going to do a very poor job of just making a home page. And so the idea is once you click this, let's put some text on this, sign up. Text looks very ugly. It'll have to suffice for now. The idea is when you click sign up, it should take you to the home page or something to that effect. So how can you do this in Figma? And like, how can you create like basically an app without writing out any code? So you can use prototype mode. So if you here you have design, prototype, and inspect. So just go to prototype, and then now with any hovering over any sort of element that you want to make interactive. So I can make the whole frame interactive, or I could make this button interactive. So I'm going to hover over the button, and I'll see this plus sign here. So hover over that plus sign, and then just you can move this arrow around. So I'm just going to make it connect to the frame. And then this pop-up will open up for like the different interaction stuff that you want to do. Like, do you want it to be on click, on drag, while hovering, etc. So I'm just going to say on click. And on click, I want it to navigate to this other frame, the iPhone Max 2 frame. And then you can choose like what kind of animation you want to do. Let's just do instant for now, and we can play with it later. So with that, I'm going to have, and you can notice that you can move the frame around, but the prototype arrow sort of like stays between the two. So with that, I'm going to click play. So I'm just going to choose the frame I want to start from and click play here on the top right. And it's going to open up a preview for me. And so here is my sort of app. And if not all of it's in view, you can zoom out. So you can scale down to fit. So options and fit. And then the whole thing will be in view. Now I can click sign up. It's interactive, and it takes me to the home page. So in this way, like lots of people, like often when you're trying to create an app or a website, people usually go straight into the coding part, but you can actually save yourself a lot of time by having a nice interactive prototype with Figma that's fully designed, and then you can just hand it over to a coder to code it for you. Thumbs up so far, or any questions about Figma and prototyping?
It also come with
I have a question. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, I have a question to either Antonio or anyone who's sort of, I don't know who code. Does any of you code? So basically, I have a very specific question. I'm also happy to keep this at the very end, to the very end of the presentation, maybe. But I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to build like a calculator, like an iPhone calculator with Figma. I've done that. And I'm trying to give it to a friend who codes, but I'm not exactly sure how to connect like the UI with the code. Like, how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways you can do this. Figma is not meant for being used as the front end. Like, it doesn't really output HTML, CSS by itself. But what you can do is get some stuff that can help you write out that HTML, CSS. So if you go to inspect, which is the third panel, you'll get all the CSS for you. Like it'll give you
Yeah.
all of this. So it'll give you the colors, the like different stuff that you can copy over for the text and so on and so forth. And then you can export this and hand it over to your friend or something like that. But this is pretty limited information because it doesn't give you the HTML, only the style.
Mhm.
So in order to
Yeah.
go for it.
Sareem, have you done like coding as well? Do you know what both ends look like?
Yes, yeah. So typically I use Figma and XD for maybe just doing the design and a
Yeah.
few like niceties, like knowing all of this stuff, like just stuff I can copy into HTML and CSS. But the actual HTML and CSS stuff, usually you have to write out by yourself. So I can give you an example. Um, let me just show you what something like that might look like. If I just do a new share for my desktop, your typical coding experience is within some sort of text editor, and you create different pages with HTML like this, and then CSS like this. So Figma can help you a little bit, but it won't get you all the way there. You still need to know some HTML knowledge in order to make something like that possible.
Okay, so I need to learn HTML and CSS to be able to hand it over.
Yes, or alternatively, if you're trying to make a phone app only, like not a website, you might want to learn like Swift for iOS or Kotlin Java for Android.
Okay, cool.
The way the workflow would work if you were like a designer for a startup or a company is the designers design like what the interaction is like and the colors and how it feels and how it looks using a tool like Figma or Adobe XD, and they can export these sort of assets, like what are the colors, what are the CSS, to the developers who then know how to embed CSS into their code and their logic and do that sort of stuff.
Right, so my expertise ends with Figma, and additionally, if I know HTML or CSS, that's also helpful. But then the handoff is like at that point. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, at some point, both the developer and the designer can, like, they will have to hand off, but they can meet in the middle. So if you know some HTML, the designer knows some, or the coder knows some HTML, you can collab in a limited capacity. But at some point, like, one person has to take over.
Thanks.
There is one plugin which I kind of like was interested by, but your mileage may vary. It exports out HTML for you. Now, the quality of that HTML is debatable. It may not be that good, but Figma to HTML, design to code. So lots of people have downloaded this. You might have some luck.
Cool, thanks.
So it'll give you like a nice web page. It may not be like responsive. It may not be accessibility friendly, but it'll be a good start.
Okay, great, thanks.
So we're coming up on time, and I think I've pretty much shared like all the features that I wanted to share. So I had like one other prototype I wanted to show you from Figma resources. So if you just go to figmaresources.com, you'll find the coffee landing page UI. But I think the concepts that they use are pretty similar. So I'm going to leave it here for now for any further questions. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I put this in the chat, but Saram has designed many apps. He was a CS major. Chaos, which is a designed app. Great job, Saram.
Thanks, Antonio. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah, Saram, thanks so much. That was super helpful.
No problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I'll just save